It began with silence. Not the kind of silence that follows peace, or the quiet just before dawn. No, this was the kind of silence that crushes the air from your lungs, that lingers like smoke after something precious has burned. It was the kind of silence left behind when an entire colony stopped answering. Ganaira Station was more than just a research outpost. It was a symbol. Built by the hands of hundreds of humans orbiting the red-tinged moon of Savaris, it represented the quiet expansion of mankind into the outer sectors, diplomatic, respectful, and always under the strict gaze of the Galactic Council. That's what made its disappearance feel like a personal message. No distress signal. No emergency beacon. Just gone. The families didn't understand. The council said it must have been a technical anomaly. Maybe a meteor storm or a gravitic rupture. They sent out a generic apology and a reminder of the risks of frontier living. That was all. But people don't forget silence. Especially not when it hides screams. When Earth received no answers from the neighboring settlements either, something shifted. It wasn't immediate. It was quiet, like the pause between breaths before someone finally exhales. People didn't scream or riot. They watched. They waited. And deep inside, something ancient stirred. A freighter captain, old, stubborn, and reckless, was the first to defy the restrictions. He rerouted his vessel near the last known coordinates of Ganaira. It took his ship 17 days to return, barely held together. His crew didn't speak much when they landed. Only one thing was broadcast, a set of images showing the ruins. Not natural. Not accidental. The wreckage was twisted, scorched, shredded. Not by a meteor. Not by physics. But by weapons fire. Precision strikes. There was no denying it anymore. Someone had done this. And the Galactic Council said nothing. At first, Earth's officials demanded an investigation. They used polite words, collaborative, transparent, cooperative, but no one from the Council responded. Weeks turned into months. The silence stretched again like old wounds reopening, until the whisper started. Not just on Earth, but among the Martian settlements, the Jupiter orbiters, even the inner belt stations. Quiet conversations in corridors. Nervous glances over shoulders. Stories of human ships being intercepted, scanned aggressively, rerouted for Council security. Cargo offloaded without consent. Crews held and questioned for hours. But no charges. No answers. Then came the broadcast. It arrived coded, embedded in the routine communication channel reserved for diplomatic updates. A message from the Council delivered with their usual cold grace. To ensure the stability of galactic order, further human expansion is to be indefinitely suspended. All unauthorized movement beyond designated sectors will be treated as a breach of Council protocols. No explanation. No trial. Just a decree. That's when humanity understood. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't a mistake. It was control. Quiet, deliberate control. Disguised as protection. And somewhere behind that polished message was a decision. Someone on that council had given the order. Someone had drawn a line and expected humanity to obey. They didn't know us very well. The first sparks came from the fringes. Mining crews stopped sending back their numbers. Smugglers went dark, slipping between jump lanes and turning off their transponders. A small group of researchers on Titan broadcasted a single sentence before vanishing. They don't want us to see what's out here. Then the old freighter captain disappeared too. Some believed he went underground. Others thought the council silenced him. No one could prove anything. But proof wasn't needed anymore. Only purpose. In a quiet room beneath one of Earth's older spaceports, a handful of former engineers, pilots, and analysts met for the first time in person. No officials. No flags. Just grief, anger, and the need to act. They didn't form a resistance. They didn't announce a revolution. They did something far worse. They remembered. They remembered every insult disguised as policy. Every sanctioned delay. Every random inspection of their ships. Every unexplained accident. Every time someone didn't come back. Every voice that went silent and every apology that came too late. And then, they started building. It wasn't warships, not at first. It was upgrades. Layers of shielding hidden beneath old hulls. Engines modified to jump longer than officially allowed. Communication scramblers. Hard light plating. Weapons hidden in freight containers. They called it preparation. Earth's governments remained silent. Maybe because they were afraid. Maybe because they didn't know. Or maybe because they finally agreed. After all, you can only push people for so long before they push back. Then a child died. Her name was Rhine. She was 10 years old. Her father was a terraform technician on Tarsus 5. A council patrol ship accused their station of harboring unauthorized tech. Without warning, they opened fire. Minimal damage, they claimed. Regrettable loss. Her father's scream over the emergency channel was recorded. It echoed across every outpost, every settlement, every home. That's when preparation ended. And retaliation began. The first strike was silent. A council listening post, uncrewed, automated, imploded from the inside. No announcement. No signature trace. Only debris spinning in the void. The second was louder. A convoy of council patrol craft was intercepted by a human escort pretending to request medical aid. When the council ships powered down to assist, their cores were ripped out mid-drift. One crew member survived long enough to send a transmission. They didn't even speak. It became a pattern. Silent, precise, and deliberate. And still, humanity said nothing publicly. Not a declaration. Not a warning. Only silence. Until one day the council broke it. They called a summit. Every species. Every system. All representatives gathered in the massive glass chamber of the Unity Spire on Deven Prime. The human seats were empty. The chairman of the council, a tall, silver-toned being with a face like still water, stood before the galaxy and said, "This behavior is unacceptable. Earth has violated interstellar law. They have overstepped their boundaries. If they continue, we will be forced to enact full sanctions." The threat echoed through the chamber like a storm. And that's when the lights dimmed. A flicker. A hum. Then static buzzed across the main screen behind the chairman. Everyone turned. The static cleared. A human face appeared. Not a general. Not a diplomat. Just a woman. Middle-aged, tired eyes, no rank insignia. She looked like someone's mother, someone's teacher, someone who had seen too much. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She simply said, "You crossed a line. You thought we wouldn't notice. You erased our people and now you're surprised that we remember. There will be no more warnings. You've underestimated us for the last time." Then the screen went black. That's all it took. The council chamber erupted into chaos. Some called it a bluff. Others demanded immediate action. But it was too late. Across the outer sectors, human ships began appearing where they were least expected. Moving faster than before. Invisible to council sensors. Stations long thought abandoned suddenly lit up with energy signatures. New designs. New technology. New resolve. The council scrambled to respond, but every time they tried to strike, they hit shadows. Because humanity had learned from them. They learned how to hide. How to build in silence. How to survive betrayal. And more importantly, they learned patience. But they weren't waiting anymore. Now they were coming. Not to negotiate. Not to ask for answers. But to erase the line that had been drawn in the stars. And this time they wouldn't stop. The story would have ended there with whispers of war and veiled threats. But something happened that changed everything again. The council made one final move. They captured someone. Not a fighter. Not a rebel. But a child. Another child. They said it was protective custody. Said her parents were part of the insurgency. Said they needed to question her for context. But humanity didn't need context anymore. They needed her back. And they would do anything, to bring her home. Even if it meant tearing down the council itself. Even if it meant burning the rules they once tried so hard to follow. Even if it meant becoming the monsters they were accused of being. Because they remembered what the council had forgotten. Humanity is not bound by permission. Humanity does not kneel forever. And when we rise together. Even now, as fleets gather in the shadows of dying stars, as codes pass silently between hidden stations, as the girl sits alone in a sterile council chamber, staring through the glass at a sky she doesn't recognize, something is coming. And no one, not even the most powerful council species, can stop it. They thought they had silenced us. But they forgot one thing. Silence isn't the end. It's the warning. She sat still, barely blinking, her small hands folded on the table like someone told her to be polite. The room around her was clean, cold, white. Not a speck of dirt. Not a whisper of comfort. One wall was clear glass. On the other side, council officers observed in silence, taking notes. An interspecies mix, long limbs, wide eyes, scaled skin, low voices. None of them looked at her with kindness. They looked at her like she was an equation. Her name was Lyra. 12 years old. Daughter of 2 Earth scientists stationed on Vetra 9, a quiet outpost mostly used for soil conversion studies. No military records. No illegal equipment. no known violations. And yet she was taken. Quietly. Without warning. Her parents were told she was being safeguarded for debriefing. Then communications were cut. 3 days had passed. Lyra hadn't cried. Not once. But every night, when they thought she was asleep, she whispered her mother's name into the air, as if hoping the wind might carry it back home. One of the council observers, a thin, silver-skinned official named Citral, tapped his datapad, frowning. Still no reaction, he muttered. No fear. No tears. Very odd. She's human, the other said. They're unpredictable when cornered. It's likely she's been trained. Citral scoffed. By whom? Farmers? But the question lingered. Because there was something in her eyes. Something that didn't match her age. Not anger. Not defiance. Just waiting. Like a tide about to shift. Back on Earth, chaos was beginning to ripple through places the council didn't monitor. A small, unregistered station hidden inside the asteroid belt was now serving as a nerve center for what some called the movement. They had no official name. No banner. No leader. Just purpose. Inside a dim control room, voices overlapped, low, urgent, and layered with static. Screens flickered with incoming pings, coordinates, intercepted transmissions. The crew was made up of ex-navigators, out-of-work engineers, a few scientists turned fugitives. And one quiet man sitting at the far end of the room, his eyes locked on a single feed. A still image of Lyra, frozen in the moment she looked up at a surveillance drone. Her face calm. Her eyes, not. They took her for leverage, someone whispered. They know we're moving. They're trying to slow us down. It's not just leverage, the quiet man said. It's bait. He was known only as Kalen. Before the disappearances, he was a systems analyst for Earth's diplomatic arm. Now he coordinated disappearances of his own, of council ships, outposts, and listening stations. Always one step ahead. Always silent. We go in now? Asked one of the crew. No. Not yet. Kalen's voice was steady, but inside he was shaking. He remembered Lyra. Not just the name. Not just the photo. He remembered her smile when her parents brought her to a diplomatic forum 3 years ago. She'd worn oversized boots and asked too many questions. She'd laughed at the sound of alien tongues and made them laugh too. He remembered thinking, she's what hope looks like. And now she was behind glass. He couldn't move yet. Because this wasn't just about a child. This was about what the council had decided humanity deserved. And Kalen wanted to make sure they remembered that decision, with every breath. Meanwhile, far from Earth's orbit, on a forgotten moon orbiting a gas giant in the outer rim, 2 figures huddled beneath a rusting relay dish. The wind howled outside the cave-like station. The air here was barely breathable, but they made it work. I told you we should have jumped system, muttered the younger one, wiping frost from his visor. And I told you we had a responsibility, the older snapped. You don't just run when people disappear. We're not soldiers. No, we're not. But we're human. The silence between them was heavier than the cold. They were part of the old Survey Corps, sent out before the restrictions, before the rules got tighter. Now they were just names on a list the council pretended didn't exist. But they had seen something. A station. Hidden deep in a nebula corridor running dark. Not council tech. Not human either. Something else. Inside they found remains. Not just metal, not just machines, but bodies. Charred. Torn. And data. A log that mentioned Ganira. That mentioned Lyra's parents. That mentioned words the council had blacked out in every record since. Words like exile protocol. They didn't know what it meant. But they knew it was being covered up. And now they couldn't go home. The younger one looked up from the scanner. Incoming. 6 signatures. Council ships. The older man didn't hesitate. Burn it all. Take the chip. Get to the emergency shuttle. Now. Outside, light bloomed on the horizon. No warning. No siren. Just the end of a quiet life. Back on Deven Prime, inside the council's deepest chamber, arguments were unraveling like thread from a worn cloth. They've gone rogue, one official hissed. We must escalate. They're one species, another shouted. You think we can't handle humans? We thought that before. Then they survived the scourge waves. Then they outlasted the plague drift. Then they refused to collapse during the resource cutbacks. You forget, they were never supposed to be here this long. And yet they are, someone else murmured. And now they're coming for us. A heavy pause settled in the room. No one spoke, because deep down they all knew. It wasn't about fleets. It wasn't about power. It was about arrogance. They had treated humanity like a flame they could snuff out. And now that flame had turned into a wildfire. Some of the council wanted negotiation. Others wanted war. But no one had answers. Because the one species they underestimated had stopped playing by their rules. Inside her chamber, Lyra watched the stars through the glass slit high in the wall. She couldn't see Earth, but she imagined it. Warm, loud, alive. She missed the sound of her father singing while he worked. She missed the way her mother would brush crumbs off her face even when she said she was too old for it. She missed home. Footsteps echoed outside. The door hissed open. A figure entered, tall, armored, helmeted. Not council. Human. She stared, unmoving. The figure knelt, visor clicking open. A woman's face. Older, scarred but kind. Lyra blinked. You're not supposed to be here. The woman smiled. Neither are you. A soft beep came from her wrist. She stood again. Don't worry. You won't be here long. Then she was gone. No door. No corridor. Just gone. Lyra sat still. For the first time she smiled. The council didn't know yet, but someone had broken through. Back in the asteroid station, Kaelin stared at the blinking dot on the screen. The rescue marker had been activated. No alarm triggered. No counter-response from the council. They hadn't noticed. Send the message, he said quietly. The operator turned. To who? To everyone. A beat passed. Then the message was launched. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. Just 4 words. She's coming home now. Every human outpost received it. Every underground cell. Every lost traveler. Every old warrior still listening. And something changed. It was small but real. Hope. The council didn't feel it yet. They still thought they had time. But they were wrong. Because across the galaxy ships were awakening. Old models repurposed. Civilian freighters rebuilt with advanced shielding. Scout vessels with tech never officially approved. Silent weapons with no signatures. Networks of humans working in shadows, passing data, building routes, scanning council movements. They called it the path. No war declaration. No demand. Just a direction. And now they were following it. Because they weren't just bringing Lyra back. They were bringing everyone back. Every forgotten soul. Every voice lost to silence. Every human erased. And the council had no idea how close the fire had come. They still thought the line held. They still thought humanity could be controlled. But that line had been erased. Kaelin hadn't slept in 39 hours. His hands hovered over the screen, pale and trembling, as wave after wave of data streamed in from all corners of the sector. Some of it encrypted. Some already corrupted. But enough remained to form a shape. The council wasn't just tracking movements anymore. They were preparing for something. A mobilization protocol had been activated across 5-star systems. Massive fleets were regrouping under the official code containment sequence. But there was no public announcement. No diplomatic warning. Not even the usual fabricated news broadcast. Just quiet, massive movement. One of the techs, young, jittery, voice barely above a whisper, spoke from behind him. They're moving a cruiser line toward Ganira's old coordinates. They're not there for wreckage, Kaelin muttered. They're trying to clean the trail. Erase everything we've found. The girl hesitated. We have someone still near that system. The old orbital ring, her name's Ray. He nodded slowly. Get her out. She's not leaving. The words hit harder than he expected. Kaelin didn't ask why. He didn't have to. People had stopped running a while ago. In the cold silence of the stars, there were no news feeds, no camera flashes, no courtrooms. Only choices. Stay and watch the truth be destroyed, or stay and fight. And Ray had made hers. He tapped into the encrypted comms relay. It was already flooded. Not just Earth-born humans anymore. Settlers from Mars. Families in the belt. People from the mining moons of Io and beyond. Even remnants of old, broken colonies, names they thought lost, were calling in. Not just for Lyra. For everything. Because this wasn't just about war. It was about being seen. Across the council-controlled zones, more cracks were showing. Patrol ships missed their check-ins. Outposts powered down without warning. Human diplomats withdrew from meetings without explanation. On some of the outer stations, council officials found themselves stared at, not with fear but with something worse. Calm certainty. Like the humans knew something was coming. And they were waiting for it. Even inside the heart of the council, the Unity Spire on Deven Prime, the cracks were spreading. A dozen species, hundreds of representatives, all supposedly aligned, but behind closed doors the trust was unraveling. They began blaming each other. You knew Earth was weaponizing their colonies, one barked. And you knew about the black site facilities they built without vote. They've always been disobedient. We should have culled their expansion during the Oxygen Treaty fallout. And risk another species purge? There's already one happening. The room quieted. That word, purge, was never used officially, never acknowledged, but everyone remembered. And now they were seeing the consequences of their silence. Because this time the target hadn't crumbled. It had evolved. Lyra hadn't spoken since the woman left. No one came to see her again. No food. No water. Just soft hums through the walls and the faint scent of chemicals in the air. The lights never dimmed. Her body ached. Her stomach hurt. But she refused to let her back touch the wall. She sat straight. Hands folded. Chin lifted. They wanted her to break. Instead she listened. Through the thin vent near the floor, voices passed in fragments. Arguments. Technical codes. Confused orders. And then, her name. Not from council staff. But from the walls themselves. Her name, whispered low in the accent of someone from home. She leaned closer. Who are you? A breath. Pause. Then, we're near. Stay ready. Then silence again. And Lyra smiled. Because she understood now. This wasn't a rescue. It was a return. Ray stood alone in the control room of the Genira orbital ring. The lights were dim, the floor trembled every few minutes, and outside the reinforced glass, a council battlecruiser grew larger with every passing hour. She had seen what they did to her friends. The outpost logs scrubbed. Civilian names listed as non-cooperative actors. Her brother's voice, gone mid-sentence during a transmission. No explosion. No scream. Just cut. She'd lived with that silence for too long. And now she had one job left. To make sure the data here didn't die with her. The relay beacon was old. One of the last analog-linked cores in this part of the sector. It couldn't be jammed, only destroyed. And before that council cruiser reached her, Ray intended to light it up. Because buried in these hard drives, beneath logs and encryption layers, was a name. Not a human name. A council operative. The one who ordered the cleansing of Genira. And that name was going home. She pressed the activation key. A sharp buzz filled the room. Then a low ping. Data broadcast initiated. Somewhere far away in the orbital labs above Earth, a technician watching the feed sat forward so fast his coffee spilled. Kalen, he called out. You need to see this. Kalen rushed in. The screen flickered. A name. A council seal. Authorizations. Orders. No denial this time. Not sabotage. Not an accident. Deliberate extermination. He stared at the screen, breath caught in his throat. She found it. More pings followed. Other stations. More leaks. Across the stars, the truth spread like wildfire. People read it in silence. And something inside them shifted. Even those who had once defended the council said nothing now. Because you can argue politics. But you can't argue the bodies of children. Back on Deven Prime, the council fell into panic. The chain of command began to break. Orders conflicted. Some demanded full-scale retaliation. Others wanted retreat. One voice, however, remained calm. The same silver-skinned chairman who once spoke about order and compliance. He watched the feeds. He read the documents. He understood the game was no longer about hiding. Now it was about surviving. Bring the girl, he ordered. They hesitated. He didn't repeat himself. 2 guards marched into Lyra's room. She stood. They didn't need to say anything. She walked with them. Down long white halls. Into the center of the spire. The place where the council gathered during only the most dire galactic events. Today was one of them. They placed her in the center of the dome. Above, hundreds of eyes stared down. Some pitied her. Some hated her. But most feared her. Because somehow, despite every precaution, every control system, every cage, they had failed to contain her spirit. And they could feel it. The chairman stepped forward. You will send a message, he said softly. To your people. Lyra looked up at him. No. He blinked. You misunderstand. You will tell them to stop. To stand down. You will say. I said no. Her voice echoed through the dome. For a moment the entire chamber froze. Then someone in the upper seat stood. A representative from a minor trade species. I vote we release her. Gasped. Another voice. From the East Wing. Seconded. The chairman's calm shattered. Order. But it was too late. The vote wasn't real. The movement wasn't official. But the room had cracked. The silence was gone. The old grip of fear was broken. Even here in the council's highest place, the line had blurred. Far outside, ships gathered. Human vessels of strange shapes. No insignias. No registration numbers. But powered, armed, moving together. Not to conquer. To retrieve. To protect. To remember. One massive carrier, black steel and crimson lights, moved ahead of the others. On its front hull was a single carved word. Remembrance. Inside it, Kalen stood beside the tactical screen. Transmission from Deven, one officer said. He turned to the monitor. It blinked. Then showed her face. Lyra. Alive. No wounds. No fear. Only calm. Kalen stepped closer. We're coming. She nodded once. Then the screen cut. No coordinates. No signal trace. Just a whisper left behind. I'm ready. The fleet surged forward. Every human soul aboard carried the weight of history, of pain, of betrayal. But more than that, they carried something else. Conviction. Because now there was no turning back. No surrender. And no mercy. The silence after Lyra's message wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like the air was holding its breath. On board the Remembrance, Kalen stood still, watching the blackness of space ripple beyond the glass. She was alive. That was the truth. That much was real. But the timing? Something about it felt wrong. They'd expected a scramble, council fleets spinning in defense, diplomats begging for talks, systems going dark. Instead, the quiet remained. Too quiet. No reaction. No countermeasures. Just the calm before something they hadn't predicted. In the belly of the carrier, mechanics checked the engines for the third time. Soldiers who weren't officially soldiers cleaned their weapons again. A young pilot, barely 20, sat with trembling fingers near the comms panel, waiting for something, anything, to move first. It wasn't fear in the air. It was something deeper. Doubt. Kalen didn't show it, but it crawled in the back of his mind. Why had the council let Lyra speak? Why had they shown her face without a demand? Why had they given them exactly what they wanted? He returned to the strategy bay and replayed the footage. Her face. Her tone. Every second burned into him. But now he looked closer. A flicker. Half a frame, barely noticeable. A pulse of light behind her eyes. Not natural. Not human. He called in the tech crew. They scrubbed the signal, filtered the code, and found what he feared. A second frequency embedded in her transmission. Buried deep like a ghost. Not a location signal. Not a distress call. A tracker. Not for Lyra. For them. It hit Kalen like a cold blade. They hadn't shown Lyra to stop the humans. They had used her to find them. The Remembrance wasn't alone anymore. Out beyond the shadows of the asteroid belt, a hidden fleet powered up. Not council-branded. Something older. Something off-record. Silent hulls with no signal lights. Warships designed without ethics or oversight. And at their head, an old symbol long thought buried under diplomacy. A single white claw wrapped around a burning Earth. They'd called it Directive Echo once. A secret program. A fallback contingency. It was supposed to have been dismantled decades ago. It wasn't. Kalen's voice cracked the stillness of the bridge. Everyone to battle stations. Now. The alert screamed through the carrier. Lights turned crimson. Systems shifted. Human ships across nearby sectors received the emergency ping and adjusted course. They weren't just walking into a council trap. They were flying straight into something darker. On Deven Prime, inside the Unity Spire's inner archives, the chairman stood in a sealed room with two others, neither of whom bore council insignias. They were taller. Unmarked. Cloaked in shadow tech that hadn't been publicly acknowledged in centuries. "You're sure the signal locked?" the chairman asked. One nodded slowly. "Their fleet's path is predictable. The girl's image delivered the last missing piece. She has no idea, does she?" "No. The tracer was injected after her last meal." "And the others?" "Ready." Outside the chamber, in the high-security vault beneath the council chambers, Lyra sat once again in silence. This time no guards. No observers. Only a soft hum in the walls and a strange pressure in the air. She didn't know it yet. But the room was moving. Not in space but in phase. The council was shifting her location outside normal detection. Not to hide her, but to erase her. Because if the human fleet found nothing, if the coordinates led to an empty shell, they would have no proof, no leverage, and the revenge they carried would scatter into chaos. Back on Remembrance, Ray's voice crackled through the line. "Got the scan feed." "Confirmed. Unknown ships are matching pace. No council tags. No standard heat sig. These are ghosts. Kalen clenched his fists. Send word to the resistance cells. We need fallback positions across systems V and 9. Prepare for multi-front collapse. They've planned this, she said quietly. I know. Then they're not afraid anymore. No, Kalen said. They're trying to end it before we get the chance. There was a long pause on the line. Then Ray whispered, Kalen, what if she's not at the spire anymore? He didn't answer, because he already knew. The girl who looked into the camera and said, I'm ready, had meant it. But the council had changed the rules. And now humanity was chasing a shadow. Back on Earth, in an underground chamber deep below the old world's capital, elders of the hidden command watched the screens flicker. Some were once governors. Others had once spoken at council meetings. Now they were simply ghosts in their own world. One of them, a woman with gray eyes and burns across her left cheek, stood. The council won't give us peace, she said. They fear what we become if we're left to grow. And they're right, someone murmured. She didn't argue. Because growth hadn't come easy for humans. They'd bled for every inch. Survived every quarantine. Adapted to every new rule forced on them. And now they were more than what the council expected. Too resilient. Too united. Too dangerous. The woman pressed her palm to the wall panel. A hidden vault opened. Inside, one final prototype. A device built decades ago, powered by gravity wells and stolen data. Not a weapon. Not exactly. But a key. To something deeper. She activated it. Above the Earth, in old satellites no longer tracked, a signal began to echo. It reached Mars first. Then Io. Then the old mining belt stations. Then the scout base on Karthus Deep. It was a phrase. 4 words. Not an order. A reminder. They burned Genira first. The phrase rippled across human systems. Ships turned. Fleets aligned. Scattered crews, scattered goals, now all pulled together by one thread. Memory. Revenge was no longer emotional. It was purpose. Out in deep space, the remembrance faced the silent fleet now fully revealed. Thousands of black vessels. No insignia. No communication. Just death waiting to be unleashed. A screen lit up. Kalen expected a warning. Instead he saw an old face. One of the council's former human collaborators. A man who once spoke for Earth. Betrayer. Long thought executed. Hello, Kalen, he said, calm as ever. Kalen stared. You. The man smiled. We tried with kindness. We tried giving you a seat. But you wanted power. And now you'll drown in it. You sided with those who killed your own. I sided with order. You chose vengeance. I just want to end the noise. The screen blinked off. The first wave of ghost ships moved. No sound. Just impact. And then the war began. Human vessels scattered, not retreating but spreading, like fire dropped on dry grass. Every movement had been planned. Not just by Kalen. But by people across dozens of hidden strongholds. It wasn't one fleet. It was 1,000 sparks lighting at once. And still Lyra sat alone. Somewhere. Now even she wasn't sure where she was. The stars outside her window were wrong. The air smelled too clean. But she felt something. Not fear. Not confusion. She felt a rhythm. Like footsteps in the dark. Coming closer. Something was waking. And whatever it wasn't going to be stopped. Not now. Not again. Not after everything humanity had lost. Not after everything they'd become. The council had erased lines. But they had drawn one final one themselves. And humanity was ready to cross it. Together. The battle had no beginning. It didn't start with a trumpet or a speech or a signal. It simply erupted, silent ships colliding, light flashing across the void like lightning cracking open the skin of the universe. The remembrance tore through the dark with its engines screaming, its hull vibrating with every energy discharge that hit it. Kalen stood in the center of the command deck, gripping the console so tightly his knuckles turned white. Around him, alarms flared, voices overlapped, but he barely heard any of it. His mind was locked on one thing. Lyra. She was still out there. Somewhere. And this was their only chance. He turned to his comms officer. Any word from Ray? Nothing since the attack started, the officer said, voice shaking. She might have been hit when the ghost fleet dropped cloak. Kalen's stomach twisted, but he couldn't stop now. Every ship in the resistance fleet was fighting at full burn. Human vessels were always underestimated, older tech, mismatched designs, patchwork weapons. But every crew had been trained in desperation. Every pilot flew like they had nothing left to lose. Because they didn't. For years they'd been told to obey. For years they were told to be patient, to follow council law, to trust the system. But the system had burned their colonies, taken their people, stolen their children. This wasn't rebellion. It was reckoning. One of the enemy ships exploded just off the Remembrance's port side. The shockwave hit hard. Sparks rained from the overheads. People screamed, but Kalen stayed upright. Another officer shouted, "New signal. Deep range." Everyone went quiet. "Is it one of ours?" Kalen asked. "No. It's not council either." They all stared at the screen as the unidentified ship closed in. It was enormous. Scarred. It looked almost broken. But its engines burned hot. Its hull carried human markings, some of them from colonies no longer on the maps. And on its prow was a name carved in jagged steel. Vigilant Mercy. Kalen blinked. That ship was lost with the Omega outpost. 30 years ago. The officer whispered, "Then who's flying it?" The ship didn't broadcast a signal. It just charged straight into the center of the Ghost Fleet, and unleashed firepower that hadn't been seen in human hands since the old Mars conflicts. The Ghost Fleet staggered. A voice came through, rough, distorted, but familiar. "This is Captain Holland, formerly of Omega. I've been waiting a long time for this. Humanity never died. We just got quiet." The comms crackled with stunned silence. Then laughter. Then cheers. It wasn't just remembrance. Across the system, old ships once believed gone began coming online. Hidden bunkers opened. Scrapped satellites turned into targeting relays. Underground voices called in coordinates. The Council's trap had sprung. But humanity had come with a trap of their own. Kalen leaned in. "Get me targeting data on the Spire. If we can isolate where Lyra's being held." Before he could finish, Ray's voice cut through the static. "I found her." Kalen's heart jumped. "Ray? I'm aboard the Spire. Hidden deck. She's not alone. She's been moved to a face pocket cell. I have the access codes. I'm getting her out." He nearly collapsed from relief. "What do you need?" "I need 5 minutes," Ray said. "And cover fire." "You'll have it." The fleet shifted. Lines reformed. Human vessels began pushing toward the Spire, drawing the attention of every last ghost ship. Kalen tapped a screen. "Full acceleration. Focus all fire on their forward armament. Clear a path." Remembrance roared forward. Lyra, inside the face pocket chamber, sat curled up, arms around her knees. Everything felt slower inside this place. Time didn't work the same way. She didn't know how long she'd been waiting. Minutes. Hours. Maybe longer. But now she felt something. A low hum through the floor. A tremor in the air. And then, light. The wall to her left rippled, then split open with a hiss. A figure stepped through, scuffed armor, bleeding from one arm, dirt smudged across her face. "Lyra," Ray gasped. "We have to go." Lyra stared for only a second, then stood. She didn't ask questions. She trusted her. They ran. The corridor outside the chamber was chaos. Smoke filled the vents. Alarms screamed. The Spire itself shook with every impact. Council guards sprinted in confusion. Some fled. Some fought. But Ray knew the path. She'd memorized every twist of this place. Every blind corner. Behind them, one of the guards shouted for them to stop. Lyra turned, eyes hard. The guard raised his weapon. And then something stopped him. A blast, red and violent, hit him square in the chest, sending him crashing into the wall. From the side hallway, a second human squad burst through. Reinforcements. The girl was no longer alone. They reached the evac port just as the walls began caving in. Outside, the Spire burned. Inside, orders collapsed into panic. The chairman stood at the highest platform, watching the flames crawl closer. A younger council aide ran to him. "Sir, they've broken the blockade. We're losing control." The chairman didn't blink. "Then initiate fallback." The aide froze. "But that protocol destroys the city. It erases the evidence. You'll kill every representative still in the dome. They're already lost." His hand moved toward the control panel. But before he could reach it, a figure dropped from above. A flash. A blade. And the chairman crumpled, breath stolen before the fall finished. Behind him stood a human shadow, someone who'd infiltrated the Spire days earlier. No name. No face remembered. Just justice delivered in silence. On Remembrance, the bridge erupted. "Lyra is aboard. I repeat, she's safe." Kalen exhaled for the first time in hours. Across the Resistance fleet, the news spread. Cheers. Tears. Relief. And something else. Purpose. They had her. They had proof. They had made it. And then, everything changed. The spire exploded. Not from a missile. Not from the fleet. But from the inside. A final failsafe locked into the foundation of the building itself. A protocol meant to erase not just records, but reality. A pulse wave spread from the core, bending light, distorting space. The resistance ships pulled back, shields groaning under the pressure. The spire collapsed in on itself. And then it was gone. Nothing left. No ruins. No orbit. Just a hole in space where history had stood. Kalen stared at the screen, breath caught in his throat. Ray? Only static. His hand hovered over the console, shaking. Then, her voice. Still here, she gasped. We got out just before it imploded. Lyra's voice came next. We made it. Kalen couldn't speak. He just turned, closed his eyes and let the tears fall. It was done. The spire was gone. The truth had spread. The ghost fleet was breaking. And humanity stood together, unbroken. But as the debris settled and the stars began to calm, another signal was picked up, deep beneath the surface of a forgotten moon. A council archive. Hidden. Active. And a message. Buried in code. Meant for one recipient. It read, if this transmission is received, initiate Phase 2. Target, Earth. The screen cut out. And the stars, once calm, began to stir again. The end, or the beginning. The stars had never looked quieter. After the battle, after the fires died out and the last echoes of war faded into space, the universe seemed to hold its breath again. But this time, it wasn't waiting for more destruction. It was waiting to see if humanity would rise from the ashes of what had been done to them. On the command deck of Remembrance, the lights had dimmed to a warm glow. The alarms were off, the screens were still, and for the first time in weeks no one was shouting. Kalen sat at the center of it all, his shoulders heavy, his eyes tired but open. Around him people moved slower now. Quieter. There were smiles, but they were faint, cautious, the kind that knew more loss was coming, but also that something had changed. They had survived. More than that, they had stood up. Lyra was asleep in the medbay. She had barely spoken since the escape. After Ray pulled her out, the girl hadn't cried or panicked. She had simply held Ray's hand the entire trip back, not letting go even once. She didn't ask about her parents, one of the nurses whispered to Kalen. He nodded slowly. She already knows. Her parents had been taken during the first phase of the Council's hidden campaign, when humanity wasn't yet aware of how deep the betrayal went. Their research had threatened to expose the truth behind the exile protocol and the buried history of Genaira. That's why they were silenced. That's why Lyra was taken. She wasn't just a hostage. She was a message. But now the message had reversed. Lyra wasn't a warning anymore. She was a symbol. Ray leaned against the wall just outside the medbay, her arm in a sling, a streak of dried blood still on her cheek. She hadn't spoken much either, but every now and then, Kalen would catch her staring through the glass, watching the girl sleep. She'll be okay, Kalen said. Ray didn't look away. She'll be strong. We all have to be. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. That part had come and gone with the fall of the spire, with the ghost fleet torn apart, and with the truth finally reaching every corner of the human colonies. People now knew what had been done to them. What had been hidden. The old records were no longer buried. Every lie, every order, every erased name, made public. Earth's council chambers, once empty and silent, now pulsed with voices again. Not diplomats. Not delegates. People. Miners. Engineers. Teachers. Survivors. They came from the belt, from Mars, from stations that had lived in fear of being found. They came carrying names of those they lost, names that were now written into the archives that Remembrance had protected during the battle. The archives had survived, despite the Spire's final attempt to wipe the slate clean. It hadn't worked. Nothing could be hidden anymore. Humanity had learned to remember everything. Every wound. Every promise. Every loss. Kalen stood before the council chamber 1 week after the battle, speaking not as a commander, but as someone who had once filed reports, trusted the system and waited for justice. I used to believe the council protected peace, he said, his voice quiet but steady. I used to believe we were part of something greater. That our place in the galaxy meant cooperation, not obedience. But we weren't partners. We were tools. And when we stopped being useful, they tried to erase us. He paused, the weight of that truth pressing down on every face in the room. They underestimated one thing. We don't forget. That line echoed beyond the chamber. It became a phrase etched onto walls, repeated across channels, worn like a badge by those who had hidden in the dark for far too long. We don't forget. And they didn't. Every human who had been taken, every name removed from databases, was honored in the Earth Archive. A living, breathing memory that would never be silenced again. Memorial stations were built in the shattered orbit of Genira. Ships that had vanished during earlier attacks were searched for. Survivors were brought home. And Lyra, she was given her mother's necklace. Recovered from a council holding bay, hidden beneath layers of false documentation. When Ray placed it into her hands, the girl finally let herself cry. Not from pain, but from release. She would have wanted you to wear it, Ray said softly. Lyra nodded, slipping it over her head. I know. She was stronger than any of them expected. Not hardened, not broken, just clear. She didn't talk much about what had been done to her. She didn't need to. She walked forward. The recovery of humanity's trust in itself was slow. Some colonies still feared another wave of retaliation. Some had fallen too far to reconnect easily. But the networks were already rebuilding. Communications, transport routes, medical fleets, all set in motion again, this time by human hands, human systems. The Council, what remained of it, fractured after the Spire's destruction. Several species publicly broke their allegiance. Others went silent. A few tried to cover their involvement, but too many records had been leaked. Too many voices had witnessed the truth. A trial was proposed, but no one showed. There was nothing to put on trial anymore. The galaxy had changed. And yet, even in the middle of that change, Kalen couldn't shake one thing. The signal. The one that came from that forgotten moon. The one that mentioned Phase 2. At first, they dismissed it as a last failsafe. A panic response. Maybe even a bluff. But the more they studied it, the clearer it became. It wasn't a bluff. The Council, long before its fall, had prepared for something darker. A failsafe protocol tied to a hidden AI core buried in the old quarantine ring. An ancient relic from a forgotten conflict between early Council species. The AI was designed to watch Earth. To scan its growth. And if humanity ever became non-compliant, it would activate. Nobody knew what it meant. Until it did. 3 weeks after the battle, lights on Earth's lower orbit began to flicker. Drones, long dormant, powered up. Frequencies that hadn't been used in centuries began to ping old satellites. The system trembled, not from an attack but from awakening. Something had turned the key. Ray and Kalen stood together in the observatory as data streamed in. It's not a weapon, Kalen said slowly. Then what is it? He pointed at the graphs. It's a scan. It's cataloging. Every human ship. Every signal. Every population center. Ray frowned. Why? I think it's choosing. They watched as the signal curved inward toward Earth, then stopped, precisely over a mountain range in what used to be old Asia. No beam. No explosion. Just a pulse. A week passed. Then a message appeared. Not from space. Not from a Council relay. From Earth. From a place that hadn't shown signs of life in decades. The message said, Directive Echo has failed. Protocol override, humanity recognized. They stared at it in silence. Ray leaned back. Is that a good thing? Kalen didn't know. He just whispered, I think it means the galaxy finally sees us. The signal shut off. No more threats came. No more battles arrived. Just peace. Unsteady, still healing, but real. And for the first time, humanity wasn't running. They were building. They were choosing who to be. Lyra would grow up in that new world. Not as a victim. Not as a tool. But as someone who had helped shift the fate of her people just by surviving. Years later, children would visit the Remembrance Museum on Luna. They would stand beneath the shattered hull of the ghost ships and stare up at the recovered data banks from Genira. They would hear about the girl who wouldn't speak, the pilot who never left her side, and the strategist who chose to fight not with rage but with truth. Some would cry. Some would ask questions. But all of them would walk away knowing one thing. Humanity had been crossed. And when that line was erased, they didn't just fight back. They became something the galaxy couldn't ignore again. Not ever. Not in silence. Not in fear. Not anymore. Because the lesson had been written in the stars. You don't threaten Earth and expect to be remembered kindly. And the galaxy? It would remember this. Forever. The end.